am honored to be joined today by my longtime friend and colleague, Executive and Artistic Director of UCLA's Center for the Art of Performance, Kristy Edmunds.
Hey, Lauren.
So before we launch into our conversation, which is the first in a series of talks to speak directly to you, applicants, fellow artists, supporters, and friends, in hopes of shedding some light on how this ongoing crisis is affecting the art world and how we can grapple with it, I have been asked to share with you a few things about Artist Relief. So to quickly summarize what Artist Relief is, a coalition of national arts organizations and grant makers came together to support artists during the COVID-19 crisis, creating an emergency initiative to offer financial and informational resources to artists across the United States. We came together quickly to help artists together. And the coalition consists of the Academy of American Poets, Artadia, Creative Capital, Foundation for Contemporary Arts, MAP Fund, National Young Arts Foundation, and United States Artists. To date, we've provided $5,000 grants to more than 650 artists. And if you are an artist and in need and want to apply, you can find our application online at artistrelief.org. We also wanted to offer something to the artistic community beyond financial support. So we work together to understand the scope of this crisis and what more we can do to help each other. So this monthly live conversation series, of which this is the first, will be found here on this YouTube page. There are weekly series of wellness videos, and all of these are presented with the support of Compound, a new contemporary art and wellness complex in Long Beach, California. So thanks to them. Be sure to follow Artist Relief on Instagram, Facebook, and here on YouTube for updates about programming, application cycles, and more. So now I would like to recognize our CART transcriber who will be providing captions throughout this talk, Beth Frazier. Thank you very much, Beth, for being here with us. We'll try not to speak too quickly. And also Christopher Matthews. Thank you so much, Christopher. He's here now and will be providing ASL interpretation. So the title of this conversation is Upholding Mobility and Access, the Together Economy. This is happening live, this conversation. So if you have questions for us, please put them in the chat and we will try to get to them either at the end or as we have a moment throughout. So after all of that, thank you, Kristy, for being here. Thank you for being in this conversation with me. I'm lucky enough to have had the opportunity to work with you in various different iterations over the last 14 years. And in the frame of this conversation, I want to first acknowledge your work as a visionary curator, as a director, as a fierce collaborator with so many different kinds of people and organizations, but also as an artist who has the ability, this incredible ability that artists have to be able to look forward and kind of see beyond to what is coming. So the first thing I need to kind of ask you, while I recognize you are one person representing one organization and can't speak for the world, I am curious for you, back in mid-March, obviously with various different international artists that you're working with and companies around the globe, you're starting to hear things coming in, and I'm curious if you can give us a sense of what was your initial reaction? What did you do? What were you hearing? How did you respond?
Well, thanks, Lauren. Thanks to Artist Relief and everybody who's behind the scenes here right now and everybody who's watching this online. You know, look, for me, it was in January. It was in January because as we were starting to hear about what was going on in China, of course, working with artists in China, I was checking in to see how people were. So, and they were checking in with me as well. And same then with South Korea and then moving on to Italy. It was literally a kind of conversation of, what are you hearing from your news outlets in China? It was uneven, what the artists were hearing, what they were like, what are you hearing about? So as I was understanding just through direct communication with people, the anxiety, the impacts, all those different kinds of things, you start to have an assembly line of connecting the dots in your own situation of like, well, the airplanes are still flying, various other things are going. Perhaps this might be actually on its way. Working inside of UCLA, of course, there's a huge medical complex here. what was happening in Seattle with the University of Washington. So pretty soon you start to get a sense, and I was on a lot of that kind of emergency planning. So by the time it was, when you hear about a hospital planning for what you have to do for patients, you can't exactly think, gosh, this will bypass an arts community. So for me, literally, it was on, March 9th or 10th, where you get a call saying, gosh, what might be the impact if athletics or events over 500 people were not going to happen? What might be that forecasting? Or you're working with faculty and the conversations are like, what might it be to deliver your curriculum online? You can see a cloud bank coming, and I did. So for me, the reaction was honestly just sitting there and almost like, it's like, stay awake. This is happening. Accept that this is happening and start to pivot and not to wait. This is happening. It's going to happen. It's happening soon. I was like, Kristy Edmunds, this is happening. Please hear yourself say that out loud and start taking action. And that was really my first, that was it. Accept and start moving.
Yeah.
Don't wait, to be on the back foot. So part of it's that, intuitive logic. I think in our artistic community, there would be an intuitive logic of like, this is going to apply. How might it affect me, the people I know, the people I care about, wherever I am on this planet right now? And what do I do and who do I reach? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's, you mentioned that idea of just kind of hearing yourself, really get real. The fact that this is going down, because you're talking to colleagues, you're talking to friends overseas, people are saying to you, if I knew even 3 weeks ago what I know now, like you just prepare yourself, it's coming. And it sounded so bizarre. It just sounded kind of like, you're in quarantine, really? Is that really?
Yeah.
But now it's so, this is our world. So in that moment of knowing you have not only artists who are coming to you, you have artists who are going out to other states that are then ultimately going to be coming to you. You're working with other institutions. Did you immediately reach to your colleagues in the presenting field to be able to say, we're going to need to be able to not only alert the audiences, alert the artists, but also help provide some kind of net underneath them so they know that you're going to be okay. Like you're okay. We're not just going to kind of fire out.
Yeah. For me, I was one of the first organizations that was going to be in a position of actually, canceling not canceling. We were very careful not to use the word cancel, but to postpone or suspend. It's just psychologically easier to cope with. So every single artist that we knew was going to be impacted. And then the ones that were outside of the first initial deadline, it was like, look, this is going down. How might you feel on April 12th if you have a show? We don't know how long this is going to go, et cetera, et cetera. But by being one of the first that was going out, at least on the West Coast, it was critically important that I communicate to other colleagues, because as soon as you have one organization suspending performances, it creates an updraft of question, concern, and pressure to others. So I knew that it would generate pressure points, conversation, things like that if they weren't dealing with it. Stanford had already been in that situation in their area. I was obviously going kind of next. So local and regional, because California was in a very different position than some of the other states at that time. So yes, it's like, how do you take responsibility to extend what you can imagine having a cause and effect to people? So every artist was communicated with first. We were very cautious about sharing how that message was going to go out. The staff was I'd scrambled my staff to be working at home, mainly because I wanted them to practice it. And so we were kind of already in a ready position when that was coming down.
Yeah, the idea of kind of trying to hold an artist or hold a company in that frame. I remember Cap UCLA putting out this beautiful performance of Ladysmith Black Mambazo performing to an empty hall, right? But actually holding them in that
Yeah.
place. And it feels like a lot of where the idea of having some of these conversations with performing arts organizations or with funders, et cetera, foundations, was really to try to be able to provide some transparency and some clarity around what an organization is going through, how you are attempting to try to answer some of those questions, and are you talking to each other, and what is the methodology around some of those things?
Yeah. Well, you know, because of the nature of us and how we present, which is, and I can pivot this to a broader field of professionals, but for us, we had international companies that were en route towards us. One was from Canada. We already had an alert that because they were in the US, they would be facing quarantine upon their return. And the sooner they turned back to get home, the better. We didn't know what different governments were going to do. Ladysmith Black Mambazo was flying in. As they were flying in, the first city they were in, we got the alert that they had canceled. So I knew right away that this was going to become a rolling situation. They already had known with us that we would postpone. It was all looming. But what we did was say, look, if you come here, we'll look after the hotels. We'll look after you. You have to regroup. You have jet lag, all these other kinds of things. And also, too, you guys, we all know this. I mean, what I saw was going to be an absolute catastrophe because of force majeure in contracts. So, you know, a contract that allows you to be in suspended animation from a legal standpoint does not allow you to be in suspension from a humane standpoint, a cultural standpoint, or a duty of care standpoint. So with Ladysmith, they came here. We spent a few days. They had a chance to recover. We were still in that platform where it was like 100 audience members or gatherings were getting smaller and smaller. So we went ahead and had them perform full out on stage. They really wanted to do it. They would now be, you know, singing and offering their extraordinary wisdom to empty seats. And so there were a handful of us in there. The crew was still working. And we filmed it so that we could give it to the audience, that we had already started the process of thousands and thousands of refunds along all of the different projects that we had in place. And it's a way of trying to invent continuity under a cataclysmic disruption. But if you pivot to the things you care about, and you pivot to the kinds of the most humane possible circumstance, you know what to do. You do. And so we did, thankfully.
Yeah. A stunning performance. And you kind of felt like you were there. It was the very beginning. No one was in Zoom fatigue.
Yeah.
Acknowledge everyone who's there. Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
And that was then, right? And you were incredibly quick to help also put some of these coalition partners together for artist relief, which is huge, right? And in 38 days, there's something extraordinary from the first phone calls to the first grants going out the door. It's a pretty monumental effort. And so a big acknowledgement to you for being part of that. But I think in that moment too, artists were just going, all we're getting is like, this is canceled, we're really sorry, and not a whole lot else. So there was a lot of, we were at least feeling it at the time, and this is maybe a month ago or so.
Sure.
There wasn't a lot of information about where things were gonna be. What was the horizon line? If the goalpost was gonna be moved, then could we just hear where it is? And then if you move it again, that's okay too, but we're a little lost at sea.
Yeah.
That's harder for institutions, right? Because there's so many other elements that come into the decision-making around that.
Hard is hard. Hard is hard, you know. I think, you know, for me, it was also it was, what is the sequence of phone calls that you need to make, right? And, or emails or whatever. And so I began immediately the process of working 24/7. And I think the third phone call that I had made was to Dina Haggag at United States Artists, because, and you know, Creative Capital, they were planning this particular kind of convening. There were all these different things that were going on that were looking like they might end up in suspension. but you are all organizations in this coalition who have direct access to grantees that are individual artists, regardless of age, discipline, so on and so forth.
Mm.
So I knew, because I only have so many points of access, artists who were not yet settling into this were getting ready to get on planes to go to Seville for a tour or go to Mexico City, or they were going to. So there was this thing of like, we have to get information out there, because I'm starting to see that the borders are going to be, quarantines are starting. You may be able to leave to go somewhere, but how do you get back? I mean, all of these kinds of concerns. So it was about information. But because, again, the performing arts, with the way in which an economy for artists is generated, is that usually the contract is upon the end and completion of your performance on a stage, that is when you're paid. So a whole economy froze immediately. And whether that is a timeline of a month or 3 months, or now maybe 6 or longer, that frozen thing is a cash flow crisis. And it's a cash flow crisis that's going to hit the shoulders of independent artist practitioners immediately. So I knew that any way we could start pivoting to bridge that cash flow gap was going to make an inordinate difference. Now, I mean, what you guys have done with that, in collaboration with, foundations and individuals who have contributed to it, and the recognition that the application of support to a group of people who are despairing and imperiled, and it affects unevenly, to make it easy, clear, and honest, as opposed to like, what's my damn brand identity and my metrics and whatever else. It wasn't that. It wasn't like, here, let me add more burden on you. And it was just incredibly full of truth and care and capacity, and everybody working at light speed to make something happen. That's one of the most hopeful things I've seen, to be honest.
Well, and it's, Dina and I were talking earlier today, it's not perfect, because nothing is, right? When you're stepping into an environment or a realm of making an attempt, knowing that's the right thing to do, as you said, you can acknowledge where you can be useful. Organizations that have the ability to fund an individual, for example, versus how would presenting institutions even remotely go about trying to build that infrastructure? But also that it's a courageous attempt without any kind of promise that it'll be perfect.
No.
There's a guarantee that there are going to be some flaws, and we all, I think, as we're moving toward a future now where we are starting to hear some things. Broadway will not be back online until today. Where hearing from significant theater companies and the dance world, and where there are some goalposts now. There are some horizon lines from large scale institutions as well as some of the smaller, but we're heading on into this kind of people are going to announce a season, and what do those things kind of look like, and what does that shift? What does the shift look like from a presenting institution, and how are you approaching at least some of the variables that you're now having to deal with?
Well,
sorry.
Going back to it, and just to be, it's like, what can be made sort of structurally clear. First of all, we had 13 different projects that were going to be postponed, and we were almost ready to announce the next full 2021 program. So all of that is, so for us, it was, how do we work towards rescheduling and taking care of that, which, how do we work towards rescheduling, and also making sure that with our contracts, we could, and this was a big, thing, advance, like recontract and advance part of that fee so that there's money. And it was a very tight conversation. It was like, do you want this? Can it be useful? And for some, it was critical that we were able to say, yes, we're postponing, and we're going to give you X percentage of that fee long before you even hit the stage. That's money out the door, while we're refunding every single ticket. I mean, 100%. It was not, and those too have a force majeure clause, that they're like, if you can try and carry that over. So there's a lot of resources that have been sitting in suspended animation. For us, it was, how do we act clearly, How do we create something we can do immediately? How do we reduce the level of uncertainty and the the chaos of questions that we also can't field very well because we're at home? So I was like 100% of the audiences in every one of these projects immediately, like automatic refund. If they wanted to pivot back and make a contribution, then great. Here's the vehicle to do that. But we can't have it be somebody leaves a message going, please keep my $20 ticket. My name's Mary. We would never, it would just never work. So we had to move swift and clear and bold and big. We had to work on making sure that artists had the resources we could, while hemorrhaging, still provide them. And if they were like, look, I don't want to spend down my future in that way, I'm going to be okay for a while, then that pivot was happening. But it was all a very open conversation. And us taking our cue from creative managers, creative producers, agents, representatives, and artists directly. And this field of managers, agents, and the creative producers are a critical part of the infrastructure here. And they too, in small boutique, LLCs or whatever their status is, that too was like an immediate pivot towards them. You cannot have part of the support infrastructure that helps an artist's mobility be imperiled at the same time. It's like, so how many different ways can we slice what we have before it goes?
Yeah.
And so that was really what we were doing. And as this timeline has continued to move out, it's the same thing. How do I create dynamics within this organization? And many colleagues are doing this as well. Everyone's geography and circumstance is different, which makes it non-uniform. It's not like there's one size fits all. And I carry no judgment to that fact. Everyone's trying to operate within the conditions of, a shitstorm, to be brief. But what we've tried to do is also make sure we're pivoting in a way that's like, okay, what are the kinds of things that artists are going to need? And they're going to need also, how do we come back together? If it was a month, that's one thing. If it's 3 months or 6 months or longer, then how do artists come back together in certain ways? How do we help buttress that time? So we've started to make like more micro commissions that do not have a pressure laying on top of them to, just because it's a crisis doesn't mean everybody's like, oh, fantastic. There's a culture, there's a giant global pandemic. Now I'm going to paint my Guernica and I'm going to write my opus. It is not like that. It is literally how can I get in touch with my family, my friends? Maybe I just need to bake some bread if I can get my hands on some flour. Maybe I have to figure, it's not all about how do we now create new work? And there's a lot of grief in that. There's projects and programs and productions and song cycles and all these different and exhibitions and films and all kinds of things that were ready for their migration out into distribution. And they'll have to go back into creative redevelopment. How do we help make that possible? And we must. We are interdependent. And this interdependence is a collective cultural thing that we have to hold together to the best capacities that we have while we're able to do it. Yeah. Sorry, I talked for so long there. I'm even exhausted from hearing myself.
No, this is really actually all about hearing from you. So it's tremendously helpful because I'm imagining that inside of all of that, trying to take care of your audience, and feel like they're valued because there's no way to know what their financial circumstances now look like, and that they would be very happy for you to keep all of their ticket money that they obviously had at will to spend. So I applaud you hugely for doing that. And to also find a way to put money in artists' hands early, knowing that it's going to be a good long while potentially before they have the ability to then go in and begin the rebuild of some of this. You and I've talked a little bit about like what that comeback looks like, right? And how some disciplines may be able to find a way in, differently. I know CAP UCLA has a multitude of really fascinating residency and fellowship programs. Did you have artists working on campus, and or how are those projects transitioning in this time? Are they just elongated, or are they taking a break because it's new work development and that just isn't working for people right now?
Yeah. Well, residencies, yes, we have residencies, and we have residencies here that are usually kind of more on early phase creative development. Those will continue apace, but it's like, do you have to come to our rehearsal studio to do your early phase development? Perhaps not. If you do, then that's another whole set of things. But again, it's always, how do you honor a commitment, and how do you make that commitment be useful? Not just like, oh, well, I need to tick the box that I've got a resident theater company here in July. It's not about that. It's about, how does that resident theater project want to rethink creative development, or, what do you need? And then we work around how everything becomes totally bespoke. We have but I think, the Alliance of Artist Communities and residency programs around this country are also a really important part of creative development for ideas, for artists. And those too have had their own, suspension of what they can do and how they too may open, and when and in what part of the country, and so on and so forth. We have a mobility challenge in terms of, where is the residency, where is the artist, et cetera, et cetera. For us, it's about saying, there is going to come a time when we start knowing more from the scientific community and the, medical community and the health experts, of when and in what way different kinds of distancing and all of that's going to take place, right? So for me, until we have more of that, how do we look after the kinds of plans that we need to make sure we're doing to help support artists who are going to need to get back into studios? Visual artists may have a different kind of circumstance and things like that, but it's still part, they have studios, they have studio assistants in certain cases, film, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really, how do we learn from each other's disciplines about the ways we're going about these things? And for the center, and for many, many, many of my colleagues, one of the things that we do have is facilities. So how might we turn those facilities away from, when a public cannot be there and you're turning over existing work, how can the facilities become useful for bodies coming back into space and learning how to be together and adjusting and rehearsing and just trying? It's not straightforward. So how to do that becomes a conversation to constantly be having. Does that sort of answer it?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And I think in that way of repurposing space that is generally used to have audience being able to partake in the experience of a presentation or a performance, then that being kind of reused for artists to just create in smaller groups. Hopefully within the next coming months, that will be the way that things work. And I think certainly for technical artists, lighting designers and sound engineers, this is also really huge time for them. There's
absolutely
craft in the way that they've developed their careers, and where are they in this moment, right? So being able to have a residency or something where maybe there's a limited amount of people starts to open the door back up for those artists.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know how many different ways to say it, but there's a kind of, we live and work in an interdependent system. We are interdependent with each other. And that interdependence can become a strength for how we repair if we collaborate together across these things. If we hold forth and just wait for when things go back to normal, not so sure. So, when you think of it, it's like, gosh, the lighting designers or the operators, or, it may have been an early creative development residency where people are just starting spacing or something like that. But now they really need more design language to be part of what that is. And the crew can help with those things in ways that they maybe had not in the past. with their knowledge. So it's about collective problem solving, in my humble opinion, and trying to find the contours that make that creative and collective problem solving useful to the most number of pairs of shoulders and spirits that we have out there is crucial. You know, and we've got restaurant workers that are affected. We've got medical people. It's like we're all affected in this thing. And so that allyship of being able to recognize that they too are deeply impacted. We have an unemployment thing that is staggering, but you don't just go, oh, now everyone is only thinking about that. It's that artists are included at the table of all of those different kinds of things. It's not like we're a force of, you know, sentient beings who can just, through our magical creative thinking, you know, do all this. It's like, no, we have to do this together. We are at those tables. We are incredibly important workforce. We're idiosyncratic in how we do it, and we're part of human continuity.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because thinking about, obviously in America, where each state, each city even sometimes are having to manage how things are going and what the restrictions are going to be, or the lift of restrictions, and then how that plays out over the course of the next few months or year. And internationally, there's a similar, but a little bit of a different story. I was fascinated. One of your colleagues, Fergus Linehan, who is the director of the Edinburgh International Arts Festival, had stated, yes, this is the, you know, a terrible circumstance to have to cancel the International Arts Festival and all of this, but it's unavoidable. And it's thinking about moving away from this model of never-ending growth.
Yeah.
Taking this moment, maybe really stop and consider, what do we do best? Who do we serve? And are we really connected to our community right now? I thought it was a really wonderful thing to say very early on. And I'm curious from your perspective in terms of how things are going here with colleagues in America and the comparison to other countries for dealing with this situation. How do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll speak about it from an institutional, organizational standpoint first, but you know, we have been for a very long time under the pressure of a kind of operating model that you know, success becomes defined by you know, who can get there for the growth factor. How much growth can you have? It's like it's a kind of or you know, brand stuff. It's a kind of pressure that lives on an organization that in order to attract different resources to do the thing at a baseline of what it is that you do, that you are supersizing as if we are industrial strength product lines, and the growth mechanism will drive capital, and it causes sprawl. It can cause uneven alignment to magical thinking and ambition. And so when this process happens now with many whose missions are truly to serve the culture and communities that deeply involve artists, our ambitions are being less pressurized right now. And that ambition, I think, is a very important thing. Like, what are we able to do and hold so that we can create cultural continuity across very diverse communities? How do we begin to, you know, not only, I don't know how best to say this, but I'm supposed to be talking about international, but I'm going back to the US. We have a lot of cracks in the sidewalk, gaping cracks in the cultural sidewalk of our country. And those cracks affect people very differently across race, across gender, across geographies. And part of being able to at least take this moment to think differently, because we're not on the gerbil wheel of show after show after show, exhibition next, brand next, fundraiser, although trying on that front, is that we look towards each other to address the ways that this time around We've fixed some of those cracks in our cultural sidewalk and adjust inequity in a very, very different way. And while we do that, we have a chance together to restore together without, you know, a budget, a costume design budget that is like that of a small nation. It's literally, how do we adjust in ways that are appropriate to the continuity of culture, to the extraordinary human imagination of our artistic population, and how do we keep the fragile and vulnerable ecosystem that we have here financially continuing to operate, because that mobility is crucial to recovery. It's not just, does LA recover and New York recover, but we have not thought about Wyoming? No. It is, you know, or New Orleans, or, I mean, I won't go into every list, but you get what I'm saying. It's like, we need to be able to listen to each other's geographies and look at the fragility of our cultural infrastructures, which has been laid bare for all to see. Our fourth wall has been breached. And therefore, our honesty, as opposed to our poker face, needs to be coming forward. And it needs to be, it's a chance for us to be exquisitely useful to the humanity in all directions that we, by profession, pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to also acknowledge Americans for the Arts, who stepped into Artist Relief endeavor by creating a survey and working with Artist Relief to create something that will actually bring data at the end of this, to learn about the artist experience in this scenario, the levels of loss. There have been articles that are coming out now, but this kind of very specific data report that includes a lot of and what is happening will hopefully be able to be taken into a place where maybe we can think about some change. You made a comment before about having your staff prepared, and it made me, you know, consider this idea that this is something we're going through right now, but potentially something we're going to need to prepare ourselves for.
Yes.
Again, right? Like that if we can actually use this time
to
change a model, or consider how to change a model that wasn't really working all that well, then maybe we can find a way towards something else. And I think that the data will really help. But I appreciate the optimism of the way that you're describing this chance.
Well, you know, many of us would look, we saw the signs of we understood the vulnerability and fragility of our economies for art and culture across this country and elsewhere. We understand that things have been changing, and that which we may have relied on in the past has shifted as well. Now it's accelerated, obviously. And the question is, you know, the pivoting forward and the really deep look at a horizon line that still remains very uncertain. But we still have a lot we can work with. And it's the working with that around our integrities and practices and interdependence and collaborative frameworks. You know, we're able to forge different kinds of collaborations now as well.
Yeah. We have had a question come in. So I'm going to throw it to you. I have a couple other things that I want to get to as we kind of come over this arc, but it's an interesting thing. The question is, we'll never be returning to normal. It will be a new world. And with that in mind, the arts are presented with an opportunity to expand, be more inclusive, and adjust presenting. What would you like to see those new ways include? What are some elements that possibly we would like to see in a new model, in a way of, this question is framed as expansion.
Yeah, understood.
Maybe it's a reframing, so I'll let you take that.
Yeah. It's a great question. I wish I had, I wish I could just pull that one down. You know, I definitely think, I'll go back to collaboration on this, because, for example, in the performing arts, there's a touring framework. Mobility is crucial. creative development opportunities for artists to make new work tends to sit on their shoulders with their producers or managers or gallerists or, philanthropists or a particular kind of grant or a commission. Creative development lives in the artist authors that creative development through whatever means they can. When I look to an expansion of our institutional lives, those who are still in different kinds of possibilities of standing, that we take a different way of looking at the creative development side of that in order to put different supports towards how creative development, and that's an expansion of often an organization. They're like, no, when you're done and it's been reviewed, then I'll look at it and then maybe I'll present it. We have to take a different leap of faith towards that creative development. Again, it's interdependent. We have a collaboration for a residency that we do with UCross in Wyoming. It's not just come to LA, but how does this kind of situation work for creative development for an artist that we partner into, and many others. We're doing, it's like I'm working on a project that I needed the wisdom of Sundance to help us figure out in a performing arts realm around filmmakers and camera operators and different things like that as we go on to online. That's an expansion of new knowledge, but rather than expand for the sake of growth, right? It's expand for the sake of how do we share assets that have had necessary reduction or not necessary, maybe this is all sort of necessary, but in certain things that rather than think through the lens of how do I grow back, it's more like, how do I take what is useful here and we share how other kinds of systems of thought might come to bear on different things. It's similar, like I can look at it and go, there's going to be a demand for artists to be on Zoom for academic curriculum areas, for, different institutions that they have relationships with. And in a way, you can end up in a situation where like everybody makes $50 if they do a Zoom call, but they're going to be repeating themselves ad nauseum over time. Not that we're doing that now. I'm not saying that. But you could do like the tip jar version of repetition to try and cobble together microeconomies and exhaust yourself. Or we as organizations could say, let us make an artist talk program that we share and increase what we're giving to the artist so that they're saying something once uniquely, and then we are able to share that, as opposed to, that's a different way of expanding. I don't think I'm getting to the beautiful silver lining clouds of the question, but I also think that we have a duty of obligation to utilize this time in thinking about how we prepare ourselves differently, because we have other things that will come in climate change, in various other kinds of things. So how we look towards the ways in which a framework that is useful to a society and multiple communities and cultures, without elbowing into who goes first and all this other stuff, for creating a different escalation of our brand identity or access to resources or something, that we share them.
Yeah.
And also with small not-for-profit organizations that do brilliant, incredible work in a very different economic spectrum, we can also create in this online version and in other versions ways to share so that the communities in a different, that don't have necessarily, maybe they can't pay for that whole dance project, or they can't, and you go, but we're going to film it and we're going to proceed, and you can participate in that for the continuity of your own community, where those who do have maybe a capacity in one thing to be able to share something for the mobility in a different form.
Yeah.
I think it's mostly, I love the word expand, because it is about how do we expand every thought process we have to be as inclusive to how the decisions we make are going to be useful in the restoration of a culture that is so unevenly distributed. Okay, sorry, now I'm off on
I just needed to let that hold there for a second. Like, that is ultimately, that's the question. That's what we're all resting. And I think the idea of artists putting work into the virtual space, and said this before about like, can we all agree that this is a space where artists still need to be compensated for their work?
Hell yes.
I think we can all, everyone,
Yeah.
everyone on this call has to now agree. You're now in a contract with all of us. We're all together.
That's
You're
right.
great. But also I think there are ways that artists too, right, as artists do, are supporting each other. Find beautiful ways to do exactly those kinds of gestures. And I think the expansion of that, that tendency with an organizational kind of backing is really wonderful. YoungArts, I'm really proud and thrilled to be a part of an initiative that was begun by Jennifer Coe, who decided that in this moment, she was going to play compositions that were written by artists that she didn't know, she'd never heard of, but they were recommended to her by composers she knew. And she began commissioning young composers that she knew. If this had happened when I was their age, I would have been completely lost. But if my colleagues in the field, who I know are going to be, they're at least safe for now, can recommend a younger composer to write music that is a minute, then I will compensate them at the fair market rate. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be all of the organizations conjuring up creative ideas. It's artists constantly supporting one another and organizations being able to step in and say, I would love to be a commissioning partner if you let me help.
But don't you think that is so absolutely part of the extraordinary, truly extraordinary, artists are specialists of a kind of love of a stranger. They're figuring out how to manifest form and ideas and contours and levels and experiments, and however, regardless of genre, is going to be put in front of a public of strangers with the hope that meaning will be found, that useful meaning will touch on someone who either saw that painting or touched that print or saw that projected light or watched that dance move or heard those notes or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or strings of code doing amazing things, whatever it is, the quilt maker, the potter, whatever. It's always a pivot and a gesture towards, I'm using my life force and endeavor to shake you back to awakeness or, activate you to vote or see an inequity or feel something sublime and do something of use with that for you. It's always this kind of interesting gift exchange of those processes. And in this process, when most artists have lost literally 90% or 100% of their any form of income for a now elongated period of time, they are still actively working to say, I see you. Maybe this thing from my archive will make meaning for you on a Saturday. Maybe if I write this play, you can read it at home. And that helps you deal with your kids who are not in school and going bonkers on their own Zoom, things like that. And so that kind of modeling of a human capacity to absolutely care and take action around that caring in whatever way you can, even when you're reasonably imperiled and under extreme stress. We have to teach our democracy to function in ways that actually do that. And we're modeling it. Artists are modeling it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this opportunity to focus on that process, right? Not the product, not the end result, not the way that we can be judged on that end result, but actually really focus on an effort and an energy toward the actual making and the courageous endeavor and that bravery that is required every time an artist is asked to step on stage or write a poem or, right? That is there, knowing there's an audience somewhere, virtually or in person.
And that was the other thing, and it came to me because I was talking with Janet Kauthterwaite at Kronos Quartet, and as everybody was in, the stay at home and be by yourself, there was also the issue of like, well, how do we rehearse? How do we practice? How do we schedule those? Like, how do you, and one of the things that I've experienced with a lot of different musicians and composers is also the thing of like, musicians are able to practice, but when they're on Zoom, there's a little time delay. And so they know they're warping the composition and it's devastating and despairing, and yet persists. So we've been talking with like a lot of these tech platforms of the reduction of time delay for small rehearsal room spaces. It's a virtual rehearsal studio, but if we reduce those time delays, it actually can help accelerate how people can stay in practice. How that happens with dance is something entirely other because it's space and how theater, et cetera. But it's just watching some of the tech industry, not just to try and go, oh, good, I can get some more subscriptions here. It's how do we also become part of a solution for the continuity of culture?
Yes.
Which is great.
It is, and it's hopeful. We have a second question that came in that is, what advice would you give to performing artists at any career level in this time of uncertainty?
Well, advice, my God, you guys know more than I do, that's for sure. But one of the things that I think is important is that you do not overpressurize yourself to keep the pursuit of perfection. You have to keep your bodies intact. You all use your bodies, whether it's a predominantly vocal instrument or, you know, it's another instrument or it's movement or it's acting, or I feel like how you keep your bodies safe, how you keep your bodies functioning, how you keep your bodies in shape is critical to, you know, and to release, like I'm kind of advocating with institutions, release oneself from the pressure of perfection and achieving perfection is a way of also, you know, holding on to a different, I mean, my God, we've just got to look after each other. The other thing I think for performing artists is that I've noticed a lot of performing artists who are offering now out archives or stream content, or they're more active on Instagram, or they're more, you know, it's the way of wanting to fall forward to share either the work that you are proud of and should be, rightly so, that you want to give now out to a community because you're trying to signal, I'm thinking about you, we're still here, this is the gift I have to give you, and I'm running out of top ramen. You know, it's like all of that is going on. But I do think that the organizations that you either have worked with and you have an affinity to, reach to them as well. Because whether you have an agent or a producer or manager or not, it's not a hierarchy of those things, but reach to the organizations that you see acting in a way that is helpful to you. Tell them, find out different ways that we can collaborate. You can collaborate in a lot of different ways online that are much different than, you know, a 70-foot stage or some other kind of thing. Things that you're used to knowing us for doing have also shifted. And so what you can teach us to do that is helpful to you is going to spark other ways of generating new ideas. And those ideas are going to mutually reinforce, you know, how we can help each other.
That's right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think artists feeling empowered to reach out and hearing from you to say, yeah, just call.
Bring it on.
Doesn't need to be a barrier. There doesn't need to be an invitation or a permission.
Oh.
Actually, organizations are building a brand new model.
Yeah.
And artists are incredible at thinking of really creative ways of building a new model. There's so much lateral thinking that goes on. You said one day, and last week, I think we were chatting, and you were like, my executive director hat is not getting nearly as much use as my try to think like an artist hat. Just
exactly.
There's a lot of creative thinking that is required in going through this process of just saying, it's okay to go, it's not going to be what it was. I have to let go of that.
Yeah.
I have to like respect what it was and know that there are elements that will return, but I need to creatively think through how I get to
That's
the
right. And you know, you guys, it's also you guys, aka Lauren, and you guys who are out there. There's also there are certain artists who have already been doing some of this thinking. They've been thinking about, how do I have a life on a stage, or a life in a museum gallery space, or a life in a, you know, in an object, and how do I have a life in an online or in an app or in a, and it's not just now to try and generate you know, followings, as it were, right? It's how do we look after one another's ideas in these different kinds of spaces. And so some of you will have ideas where you literally go, I don't know if this is going to work. I made this play 10 years ago, but the way that the play was made suits, I think, what I now understand to be a possibility for an online interface, right? And how might we do some of those things together for the foreseeable future, so that we are collectively working on a continuity with our audiences and viewers and supporters and fans. I mean, they're in grief too, you guys. It's like, you know, I hear from these audiences, and many of them too. Our audience here is super diverse, as is the case in many places. So again, COVID affects them differently. What, you know, the certain higher risk population groups, various things like that. Many people are not, for their own like health and well-being and longevity, are not going to come back into a theater venue with another 1,000 people or 20 people until there's a vaccine. Okay, so we can't also let it be this split of saying, once we get back to the stage, for the bold, brave few in the who want to buy tickets and come back into a highly spaced and choreographed sitting, that we leave behind those who are not able to do that for their own sense of well-being. Right. We now have to have a parallel life that keeps continuity for people who are not going to be able to come back into physical space comfortably for all kinds of different health reasons, and economic reasons. Right. And I mean, with what, 33 million people now in unemployment directly, like, these are also our community. These are, you know, artists are often people who are buying tickets to come and help support their friends and doing different kinds of things. And they are a critical part of one another's, you know, literacy and I loved your show and esteem. And you take pride in buying a ticket for your friend's, you know, premiere or show or work in progress thing or barn raising at a pub, whatever it is that we're doing, we signify with how we spend our time and what we're doing with our limited resources. And those resources are more limited now. So it's also about how we have extraordinary empathy for the human family that is impacted on this thing in an extraordinary scale. We've also lost some of our artistic leaders in different age demographics, first and foremost, and also cultural groups and racially disproportionate. You know, I'm super involved in the Indigenous community and the Native community, what's happening there. So we have to also be able to carry a continuity of our care through, you know, the infinite possibilities between 0 and 1, AKA digital online things, without feeling like, if I don't know how to do that, I can't participate and I'll be left behind. So we all have to look at how we can help one another, including letting somebody just frickin' rest and look after themselves and walk their dog for a minute. It's like, come on. Our impulse is to overproduce as a means of optimism. It's how we practice it. And we get on a gerbil wheel and we're unsustained and we're going bonkers and we're trying our best. We have that pressure removed right now. So we can get off the gerbil wheel, focus on our own both survival as individuals and as a community, and discover communities who we are allied with and signal how some crazy thing that we've thought of might be useful to that field or business or industry, and just stay awake to our possibilities here which is what we've always asked our audiences to do from the art world. Stay awake to the world around you. Let me shake your complacency off so you can hear this differently, and we can get on to doing our higher and better best as human beings. And audiences are listening to us. Ask them for that too. And we can do it for them, I think. I mean, sorry, I'm banging on, but a lot of people have spoken to me about what is happening to your bottom line, right? The bottom line. And what that means is the economics of the Excel spreadsheet. And I can tell you, any number that was black is going red rapidly. I get that. But we have a bottom line that is actually more important. And it's the bottom line of our culture, of our continuity, of how we offer, what it means to be very honestly truthful to our mission, to our creative purposes as individuals. So the bottom line now is the bottom line of the artistic culture and creative community, focusing on our continuation well and healthily. Yeah. That's the bottom line that will cause, even if we're working from a tip jar kind of economic reality, whatever those things are, and we must resource things. I'm not trying to say that resources don't matter, believe me. But what I am trying to say is that there's other possibility that when we're feeling despairing in the resource area financially, that there's also a place where we continue to have strength and things that we can offer. Artists don't want to leave their potential on the table. You know what I mean? They want to make it useful to schools, to young people, to communities, to the restaurant guy down the street, to, you know, the woman with the great yarn shop, to whatever it is. And it's just about how we look at this cultural continuity as the most important bottom line that we have now. Young people to be scaffolded into it, people who have had robust careers to help, all of those kinds of things. Yeah. That's the bottom line.
That's beautiful, Chris. And that is a wonderful way to close.
Oh,
there's something more that you want to add as a closer. I think that's a beautiful way for us to come to a way of thinking about, there is a lot of uncertainty, but actually what we know already is that we need each other. If we can come to that, if we can focus on that, and if we can support one another in this moment, that will ultimately get us there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's important for artists who are listening out there to know that your audiences and your viewers and your collectors and various other people, they're not forgetting about you. We're all just trying to, and they too are in grief. They will activate. We're just taking the time to find the way in which we can help make that happen, knowing that they are changing like we are changing. The other thing, you know, there, as so many, this is just pure like nuts and bolts, but there are certain things that are going on out there that are going to generate other jobs. So many artists, as we know, they work in hotels, or they work in restaurants, or they work in, you know, scoring facilities in film, or they work in their, or education, and there's other, or Pilates teaching, or whatever. So those things have also had their own freezing. They'll open and start finding their way back, but that's not going to help an artist. An artist has to do their peripheral work that maintains their cash flow for their costs of living in order to keep doing what their principal work is. It's rare that we all get to just do that 100%. And if we're lucky at a certain point in time in our career, that happens. But there's going to be enormous amounts of contact tracing jobs that are going to come through in this country. And contact tracers are people who have to be able to, on the phone, working remotely, help bond with somebody quickly, explain that they have possibly been exposed, et cetera, and do these things. And I've been working here with county and city and state officials to make sure that artists are on that roster and to be able to be trained, because there's a natural predisposition to be able to move towards a stranger and get to somewhere meaningful quickly. And it's a, you know, God willing, this is a temporary employment situation. But there are certain things out there. And, you know, it was Ann Carlson, the choreographer, who was saying to me, I think we would be really good at this. So there's things to be looking on the out for some of these things. And the other is, for those of you who know how to code or are learning how to code, I'm telling you, coders galore. And again, it's something that you can carry as a tool on the side while you just find ways of restoration. But every person that your work has either been affected by, moved by, perplexed by, made awake by, all of those things that you have already made and extended and given into our culture are still in us. And so you have to know that your work continues to expand, even if it's inside of the archive of a living memory of your communities. And as you find form, we are there for you too. So I just didn't want you to feel despairing that if you're not making something new, that somehow you're not making, because you often made work that is completed by the person who receives it. And they're completing the work as they change and rely on it differently now. And that is a chance for us as an arts community to be able to say, while we do find the next way of making, it'll be there for you, like you are going to need to be there for us. And we'll get there.
Thank you.
Shit, I almost started crying. Okay.
I think everyone watching is crying, and that's why I'm going to wrap this up, because I don't want to have that moment. I'm sure I'll have it as soon as I hit end meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
you
for finding a hopeful place for all of us and an inspiring consideration of what we know, but we have a hard time articulating or bringing to the surface. Thank you very much. Thank you to those of you who asked us questions, and to all of you who tuned in from all over the globe. Very much appreciate your time and your energy. Please remember, if you are an artist and you are in need, one thing that we can try to offer, there are far more applications than we're able to fund, but please go to artistrelief.org for financial support and also resources. There will be additional conversations that are coming in the next few weeks about artist advocacy and artist-led support initiatives. And if you're listening and you happen to be in a position of wealth and are interested to contribute to artistrelief.org, there are a great many artists out there who could really use your support. So
it's true.
Thank you, Kristy.
Thank you, Lauren. And thanks everybody at Artist Relief and all of the people who have contributed and keep contributing. It matters immensely. Thank you. Stay safe out there.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Bye.